solution, generally under the umbrella of fraud prevention. Joining me today is Anne-Marie Kelly, who's the Pays Head of Fraud. And the two of us will go through a presentation for you that gets into defining the different types of fraud that are happening, looking at implementation of an IDV system. It's pretty simple, actually. And then into some specific use cases and trends of different things from the not so good people that are showing up increasingly now at car dealerships and looking to defraud you of the purchase / financing that they're undertaking. As Eliza says, if you have any questions, then please put them in the chat. We'll schedule this so that we'll probably spend a half an hour, the first half of this on going through those things I mentioned. Use cases, probably 15 minutes from 30 to 45 minutes on the hour, and then the last 15 minutes on Q&A. So with that, I will get started. Just a quick thing about Pays. I'll just be really quick here because I want to get into the meat of this quickly. So I mentioned that we're specialists in digital fraud, KYC, AML, and income verification. We launched the first dedicated IDV solution for auto finance in 2022 and have processed close to 100,000 transactions since then, and we're the most used and most trusted IDV solution in the market. We've got over 250 dealership rooftops, about 15 leasing companies, which is obviously going to grow with the FINTRAC requirements coming out in April. About 3% of what we see are flagged with fraud signals, and that's pretty big math when you sort of multiply that by 100,000 and an average vehicle value of about 50,000. We're also got a enterprise grade information security protocols called SOC 2 Type 2. So we take the security of this data and retention of it very seriously. We have one platform that allows all of this and is easy for everyone to use. So whether that's dealers, customers, or lenders, and with the multiple integrations that we have. And as mentioned before, we're trusted by lenders. So this is the agenda that we'll go through. Definitions are one of our favorite sayings of people, process, and technology. It's not one of these on their own, but all three working together that's going to stop these problems. Hotspots in the workflow, so looking at that customer journey and their engagement with the dealership at different points along that and where you can be exposed to identity fraud, the implementation of this, case studies, and then Q&A. And with that, I'll pass it to Anne-Marie.
Thanks, David. All right, let's get started and set the table. So as automotive industry moves towards more digital and more remote transactions, sophistication of fraud keeps pace, and it's no longer about bad checks anymore. It's well organized, it's multi-layered attacks. So what we've done to help our dealer partners and our lending partners understand sort of the threats, we've categorized the threat landscape into three pillars: into identity fraud, into income and employment fraud, and the growing threat that is keeping lenders up at night is bust out. So let's talk about these and the impact. It sort of sets the table for the rest of this session. Identity fraud really is the who of fraud. Is the person standing in front of you or behind that computer screen who they say they are? And the key distinctions that true name theft or first-party misrepresentation, you might hear that in the industry, is traditional identity theft where a real person's credentials are stolen, whereas synthetic identity is sometimes referred to in the industry as Frankenstein fraud. And why? Because criminals actually take pieces of personal information, so social insurance number, name, address of multiple people, and they combine it together to create a brand new persona that is literally untraceable. Why? Because that consumer or that identity does not exist. For dealerships, we say watch out for straw persons or buyers. So we're seeing a lot of this where a legitimate is paid by organized crime to sign for someone who actually can't qualify. They're just the face of the criminal organization. And we'll unpack how to identify that. Moving to income and employment fraud. This is often soft fraud committed by real people who simply want the car, but they can't afford it. David always likes to say there's a willingness to pay and there is like an attempt to pay, a willingness to pay. David, I know I got that wrong, but anyway. However, the growing danger is digital tools have made it really, really easy to manufacture high quality and realistic pay stubs. So now we're seeing ghost employers. So fake companies with real websites, real phone numbers. They'll actually pick up the phone and verify the fake employee. Again, this is well organized and business-like, just like we run our businesses. The action that must be taken is that we can no longer rely on visual scans of PDFs anymore. We need digital verification technologies that pull the data directly from the source. And then let's talk about bust out. Literally, this is what keeps or is making lenders quiver. This is the long game of fraud. It is often the most expensive for dealerships and for lenders because we don't see it coming. The process is this: the fraudster behaves like a model customer for months or even years, building out what's called sleeper accounts. Remember, I talked about building out synthetic identities. They apply for real bank accounts and they operate them just like you and I would. And that's to bypass any type of models or behavior models that would otherwise pick up on bad actor behavior. They build a great credit score. They increase all of their limits, and then all at once they bust out. They max out their lines, they finance high value vehicles, and then they disappear. And the result you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen here is the image of a shipping container. These vehicles are often on a boat headed overseas. First payment default is never paid. And so by the time the bank realizes that the loan is bad, the car is already shipped and the customer literally has vanished. So look, the bottom line here is that using technology to bypass traditional gut feelings, identity fraud tricks our eyes, income fraud tricks our spreadsheets, and bust out fraud tricks our trust. To combat these, we have to shift from looking at the documents and looking at the person to validating the data that's in front of us. Next slide. So let's talk about the problem. Look, we know auto finance is already here. We know that because all of you are participating in this webinar today, and we're all talking about it. And so we look at basically, why is it already here? AI, we know, is supercharging fraudsters with fake IDs, synthetic identities, with documents. Legacy identity checks. So I equate that to being taking a photocopy of a driver's license, putting it on the desk while the test drive happens, and giving some confidence that that person who provided you the driver's license is actually legitimate. Fake bank statements, bust outs, I just talked about that. And I'll talk about this and lean in a little bit further as we further along the webinars. The bad actors have figured out how to exploit the auto approval. Zero stipulations, no more identity checks. They have figured it out. And again, we'll unpack that. Next slide. So what we're seeing now is with the rise of technology that the bad actors are using, and as much as we are getting ahead of it, and some fraud is actually getting through. This is a real example of something that we've seen where very high quality fake IDs are getting through multiple identity verification solutions. And so why? They're manufactured IDs, they're true name credentials. So in other words, it's a real person, PII, information, name, address, and date of birth. But the photo has been created. It's actually not the photo of the person that owns the PI. Why is this happening? We're seeing that more and more inside jobs, insider threats are creating these documents that are literally coming from the registries. So that's a problem we'll talk about insider threat. The one on the below, this is real people using their real IDs for organized bust outs again. So we get into that first party fraud or first party misrepresentation. This is where, in the end of 2025, there were tens of thousands of people with expiring visas in Canada that were fleeing the country. What we saw is that these people were selling off their IDs, legitimate people with legitimate IDs, getting the cars and then never to be seen again, a typical bust outs. And so what they have identified is that there is a really fast way to grab a credit profile and bypass all of the ID and the stipulations through the auto approval, because they know that the banks aren't going to come back on the dealerships and ask for more information. We identify that currently through our income verifier. And so again, I'll talk about what people, process, and technology equates to, and it's really the combination of those three. So this is really what we're looking at here in Canada. And so these numbers literally are startling. Auto fraud year over year, this is a well-known stat that has been published, has increased by 54% year over year. That's massive. Again, why? We think beyond just sort of the bad actors, the macroeconomic pressures, so the interest rates, inflation, they're driving desperation fraud. I mean, we hear all the news all the time that people literally can't afford their groceries. And so we're at, some consumers are at odds in getting into a car and lying or misrepresenting themselves, or selling their IDs to get that car. Again, generative AI, can't talk enough about what that is doing to technology and our reliance on it to give some confidence. And again, organized crime are seeing vehicles as liquid assets. But just before we get to the next slide, first party fraud, again, is increased to about 70%. What that means is that 70% or of the first party of the fraud that we're seeing 70% of it is first party fraud. Again, that is a legitimate person, Anne-Marie, lying or falsifying my information in order to gain that credit, or selling off my ID to someone else in order to get that credit and disappearing. So David and I, we talk a lot about, if any of you have ever been on any of our webinars before or heard us, we talk about the importance of people, process, and technology working together. I've been in financial crime prevention for over 30 years, and it used to be just process, or it used to be just technology, rely on the technology because it's going to save the world. It's actually just a widget and part of the process on how we defend against bad actors. People will always be your first line of defense. Hiring the right people, and what I mean by that is people that are willing to learn, identify. You've done your background checks. That's probably for another webinar on picking out the right people with our dealerships, and training them to recognize behavior that just doesn't seem normal, or that gut feeling. But with that gut feeling, there has to be a process that what happens when they get that gut feeling, or there are signs that tell them that something just isn't right here. So standardized workflows, audits, checks, mandatory identification steps and tools, and then clear escalation paths so that that salesperson or F&I manager, or whoever, or even at the service desk after sale, they know what to do when those spidey senses go up. And then finally, using technology, the validation layer, to actually help the people in the process along and garner those right decisions. Next slide. So traditionally, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is how we think about how identity verification is done today. We call that credit first identification. The problem with this is that it's risky, because we pull the credit file based on scan ID in an application, and we put a lot of emphasis and confidence in that score is actually validating the ID. What's really critical to think about here is that in order for anyone to have access to a credit file, the consumer has to grant permissions, consents and permissions. And if we don't have the right permissions in order to get that credit file, the legitimate consumer can actually come back, and they do have a case to say who actually gave permission to my credit file. So something for us to think about. The solution really, as we think about it, is identity first lending. So traditionally, the credit first identity verification is done in the F&I office. It's after a relationship has already been built at the front end, and now we're pulling credit bureau or other signals in order to validate that identity. Identity first lending is really, or identity first verification is putting it to the forefront. So at pre-qualification, at test drive, before that relationship with the salesperson is or as it's being created. And so what that happens is then you establish an identity verification before it gets into F&I, before it gets into the credit portal. Moving along. So there are a number of different hotspots in the workflow when we think about from pre-qualification all the way to after service. And when we think about pre-qualification, fraudsters are using generative AI to create synthetic videos and audios for digital pre-approvals. They may bypass liveness checks during remote ID verification using high fidelity AI generated imagery. The credit builder of priming is criminal rings are warming up stolen or synthetic identities by using them for minor credit builder services months before approaching a dealership. A clean but thin credit history is no longer a guarantee of legitimacy. And again, it gets back to that credit first lending versus identity verification. And then the mule recruiter. Organized crime is increasingly recruiting mules to use their legitimate IDs, secure the financing, and then bust out later. Test drive. So social engineering of staff, again, we talk about the relationship of that bad actor coming in the dealership or even online. One-way test drives, we're seeing this again where identity verification becomes critically important for a number of reasons. One, for your dealership employee safety. And number two is, again, we don't want to be giving folks access to vehicles that have expired driver's licenses or driver's licenses that have been manufactured. And so for the dealer principals or GMs, we need to look into our insurance when that happens, and notwithstanding the dangers of the one-way test drives where the cars don't come back. And then identity swap tactics, I've talked about that before. The finance office, again, we get into that AI-generated documentation, pay stubs, T4s are being fabricated using AI tools. And so it's really, really important that we go to the source to validate, ensure that the mathematical consistency is there within these documents. The straw purchase 2.0, this is beyond traditional straw buyers. So I talked about mules before being used. We're seeing a rise in complicit employees where they are actively helping to falsify income. And that is something that's not new. We've seen that in the past. I think just the rise of the discussion around fraud, we're seeing that. And then, of course, deposit fraud. There's a sharp rise in fraudulent bank drafts and bounced back electronic transfers as well. And then finally, the auto approval. So the auto approval, I've talked about this. This is literally where auto approval systems prioritize speed and fraudsters hit multiple lenders simultaneously. By the time the credit bureau updates, which is typically 30 days later, the fraudster has secured 3 or 4 high value vehicle loans across different banks. Synthetic identity maturity. So, synthetic identities, again, that's real data being mixed together from a number of different people to create that Frankenstein identity that actually doesn't exist. These credit scores typically are 750 and higher, and they are the perfect profiles. Again, so they bypass any type of a underwriting or verification of employment or identity and skip right to that pre-approval, and the car rolls. And then finally, the first payment default. So the legitimate borrower under economic stress who uses AI to slightly inflate income to qualify. They often make the first few payments, making the loan look really good and look like it's performing before defaulting. Again, we talked that about busting out. And the question around that is that a credit risk or a fraud risk? That's a question, again, that if we look right to the front of the identity verification, these things can be triggered much before the car rolls. Delivery, again, social engineering of staff. So that is that relationship that's being built by the bad actor and the staff within the dealerships, and the identity swap tactics. So again, using identity verification at delivery, we have seen time and time again where there have been steps skipped in the process or lack of a process in a dealership, and the vehicle is rolled, leaving it up to the delivery person to take ID, and ends up not being that person. It ends up being a fake ID at point of delivery. And then, of course, after sale. Never think that identity fraud or identity crimes can happen just before finance. It also happens after sale as well. And so having a strong ID verification process in your service center also becomes critically important to avoid those tires and expensive parts from also leaving the dealership. All right. I've given you a lot of information, red flags, but let's get down to the skinny of really what are common red flags that you can be looking for in the dealership. So communication and remote interaction. What we see more and more and more again is largely non-face-to-face during the buying process. A typical consumer takes about 17 days to look for and do their research on what type of car that or vehicle that they want to purchase. Bad actors often push for pre-approvals or guaranteed finance before visiting the dealership. So that's sort of a red flag. Sympathy play, you'll see this in one of the use cases where the ID doesn't look like the person that is in the dealership or online doing video chats. And so playing on our emotions is something very big. And you'll see an example where a person had said that he had stage 4 cancer, and that's why he didn't look like the person in the driver's license. Inconsistent documentation. I can't stress this enough. We are seeing time and time again where the geography doesn't match between the ID, the person, and the car. So we're seeing cross-provincial purchases of vehicles. And again, we're seeing driver's licenses that come out from the east, but car purchases being made in the west, and the person is somewhere in the middle. Again, the geographic, does it make sense that somebody from from out of province is coming to your dealership to purchase a vehicle? And also, if identity verification fails, and it will, legitimate people's ID will fail because of technology. But if it fails again, and they promise to have alternative ID at delivery, that's a red flag. Couple of the behavior warnings, the buyer that is in the dealership or online are accompanied by individuals who do all the talking. Credit scores are prime plus or super prime. There used to be a day that we would have applicants that were subprime, in the 500s or 600s, and that would sort of be an indicator. It's not anymore at all. And they do little negotiation. They accept all the back end products and everything that you are offering them with no questions. Let's talk about, turning mandated compliance into a competitive advantage. I'm sure that some of you have been in to dealerships where there's pushback about, invoking any type of identity verification is going to slow down the process. The consumer or the purchaser is not going to like it. It's a bad customer experience. It's expensive for the dealership itself to invoke any type of identity verification. And this is a real example where David and I did a cross-country tour last fall and really talked about the value of implementing people, process, and technology, but the technology specifically is not expensive. And so, David, if you can just click right through this. This is a real example where we had protected 10 dealerships. You can see the numbers here. Within 48 hours, we had $250,000 protected by using technology. The average monthly cost for these 10 dealerships was $2,500 combined, and it ended up giving an 800% ROI. And so if you click one more time, so look at that bottom blue line, right? So the identity verification paid for itself in 7 years in just 2 days. And so when we start talking numbers like that, it really brings the power of the cost, yes. And we as consumers we are all used to taking selfies and showing our ID because we do that in our personal life and our social life. So it's becoming more and more, and we've not, I think maybe under 10 consumers across the country over the last few years have actually thought that the customer experience was bad. So those odds are pretty good. Next slide here. All right, David, I'm going to hand it over to you. Yeah, I think I'm going to take a drink.
Take a sip of water.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Or whatever else might be in that cup.
Thank you.
Well done. So we'll get into some practical things here. We'll talk about that. You've got choice, obviously, right now in terms of choosing a vendor. The things that we talk about when we do training and implementation and working with the management team, questions to answer before really rolling things out, and then the actual training and rollout. So the first would be, as I mentioned, you've got some choice today. These are the things that we see, given that we've been doing this for almost 4 years now, that are really important in terms of adoption. And they have to, like, the number one thing is that it's easy for your personnel and your customers to use this. Yes, the technology underneath is important, and it's doing what it says it's going to do, as per Anne Marie's talk. But if that technology is not easy to use, if it creates a lot of friction, if it doesn't have a lot of flexibility, if customers don't want to do it, then you're really not solving any problems. Tried and tested software. So any new software obviously is going to have glitches and things to work out. We've done that over the last 4 years. We've got a fraud expert who has just been speaking for the past half an hour, as you can tell, and that's quite a bit different than, here's the technology, good luck and God bless, and we hope you don't have any problems if you experience fraud. Security, this industry experienced a couple of pretty well-known data breaches in the last couple of years, and those are really bad things for everyone to happen, certainly for customers. So when you're looking at a vendor, make sure you're asking the right questions in terms of information security. And that SOC 2 Type 2 is probably something to look for. It's the highest standard that you can achieve in North America. And then integrations. So data, movement of data, is it getting to where it needs to go? Second, so when we've got somebody signed up, and then we're talking to either the dealer principal or the GM we're talking about training. We're saying to them that there's some fundamental questions to answer internally as a management team before we get to training. So one is why? Why are we implementing an IDV solution? Look, when we started this in 2022, having to explain this to customers was something completely new that maybe many of them hadn't seen anywhere before. That was a challenge. Today, the why usually starts with the F word, fraud. Any customer that you're talking to has likely received, even today, multiple text messages or emails. Maybe they've got parents or grandparents that have experienced some sort of a scam. So we're doing this to prevent fraud, to protect you, legitimate customers, from having your identities used in crimes like this. We're protecting our employees from having to deal with criminals, and obviously we're protecting our business as well. Why is a super important one to discuss, decide, and then communicate internally to your team so that they can then communicate really simple 1 or 2 sentences. Why are we doing this? What types of deals? So the what type of deals? So what type of customers? Are we going to do it on every deal? Are we going to do it on deals from out of province? Or are we going to do it on deals for people that we haven't seen before? Deciding that and then being able to set a rule on that. So that gets to our process that we talked about, people, process, and technology. When in the customer journey, the best practices now are really test drive, doing it at a test drive where the engagement between the fraudster and the salesperson at that point is very light, and you're able to separate the good from the bad people pretty easily, and you don't continue on and waste time and invite the criminals into your dealership. And then what if? So what if we see fraud? And we said earlier, 3% of what we see on average, we're flagging as fraud. Then what? So process. What's our process? What are we going to do with this person? Anecdotally, I'd say that probably 8.5, so about 85% of fraud that we see, dealerships they're looking to just push that person away. They'll increase the ask around identity or income or employment, a lot of documentation. That is something that the fraudsters won't be able to provide, so they go away. And then about 15%, including one of the big ones that we stopped for the Buds Group that was actually in the news in December, was where we're flagging it. They've got a process that said I think it was a $210,000 Range Rover, and they called the police. They did a sting. They got the person arrested. So those 4 questions really, really important then as you're going to roll something out like this. And then for training, then the when helps us to think about who are we training then? Like which dealership personnel are using this and who we're training. We do a 1-hour training session. We go through the software, but we also look at the different outcomes of this. Obviously, green is good, approve, move on. But again, we're going to have a certain percent. Unfortunately, they're going to be red, and make sure people understand what those mean. Every new user, we say the first transaction request that you send it to yourself. You can see then, as a customer would, how easy it is to use. You can look at the different documents that theoretically could be provided. And then that usually answers a lot of questions, and even pretty much 100%, I would say, of some of the preconceived biases in this. And then we work on the go live date, and that wraps into a process internally that you're putting together for the use of this system going forward. So we're going to switch to, we'll stop the boring stuff now and maybe get into some case studies and take a look at some of what we've seen.
The case studies I'm going to walk you through are just give you different scenarios of what we're seeing consistently. So these are not one-offs, certainly, but they're examples of what we're seeing from the West Coast to the East Coast and everything in between. This first one is the gentleman that I had referenced before. So you can see on the top right-hand side, that's a liveness. So what liveness does is actually proves that you are a living person. You're not a photo. You're not a digital injection. You're not, you actually are living and breathing. And so this particular one failed, likely because you can see that there's a light over top of his head casting a shadow. He is in the dealership. And so that is just why that failed there. But I think what becomes really important here is that he failed the face match. Why? So he told the salespeople, again, he had stage 4 cancer. There was an age consistency mismatch. The person in the driver's license was considerably, the appearance of him was considerably younger than this applicant, and we flagged it. So the dealership requested second pieces of identification. He failed to provide that, and the dealership avoided becoming a fraud victim. Again, so the play on emotions we see with low-level fraud. That's, maybe one-offs, but certainly a tactic that the bad actors are using. This fella here failed the technology because he actually has an Ontario driver's license that is real PII, so a real person, but he took his picture and he put it on that driver's license. Now, to the naked eye, nobody can tell that that is a manufactured or an altered driver's license. Again, it gets into the technology. But what he also did was he actually used a picture, so the same picture, for his liveness. And so, in fact, the liveness detection failed because that thing was not alive, right? It was a picture. So another sort of case of low-level fraud, but again, we're seeing this as well. We see this traditionally in remote transactions where the liveness or the selfie is being taken not within the dealership. This fellow here, you can see a lot of different things that are happening here. Again, non-face-to-face, it's remote. He failed liveness because of a digital injection. Okay, now we're starting to see a little bit more sophistication here. You can see with a circle on his picture, we can't see his ear. You can see where the arrow is, his shoulder is cut off. So really poor digital injection. And basically what that means is that in the session, without getting too technical, in the session, there is an injection of another person or another live person, basically purporting to be someone else. So it bumped in the injection, I guess, if you will. And this is what we got, which failed. The other part too is that there are multiple data points on this driver's license that were fake that also flagged. Again, to the naked eye, you'd never be able to see. And this dealership as well got, stopped the transaction before any loss had occurred.
Can I mention just something here to Emery, is that for Quebec driver's licenses, most of the fraud that we see on Quebec driver's licenses is not with Quebec dealers. Most of the fraud we see on Quebec driver's licenses are in the West. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but big time in Alberta and BC.
Yes. Okay, this person, I've coined her as the fraudster that will come, we'll see her again. So the interesting thing about her is, so I look at the database, we have a dashboard every day, look for bad actors, look for signals, alert dealer principals, general managers about things that I'm seeing. And with this particular person here, we saw her back in September 2024, actually, in Calgary, attempting to buy a high-priced vehicle in from a Vancouver dealership. So there we talk about geography, right? She's in Calgary, but she's going to Vancouver to buy a Range Rover. How many dealerships did she have to pass? The problem with her is that, again, her ID failed. So you see the top ID, that is a photocopy of a passport. It failed because it's not a real or legitimate ID. So it's a photocopy. So she said, no problem. I've got another piece of ID here. So she produces an Ontario driver's license. Again, think about this. Calgary, Vancouver-based dealership. She produces an Ontario driver's license. Not impossible, but again, a red flag. So she fails the ID verifier that there are multiple signals on that driver's license that shows that it's been tampered with. She grabs her information and she runs. We never see her again until 7 months later. She returns again. And this time she's trying to purchase a Cadillac, different dealership, by the way. We see her again. You can see here that in the previous, in September 2024, she had produced a photocopy of a passport. And I'm going to show you the differences, but what you'll see is that it's a different picture on the passport again. So she's recycling identity. She's part of a well-organized organization, I guess, if you will. She failed again. You can see that on the top left-hand side, not where she's not wearing glasses, she fails the ID verification. She says, no problem. I'm going to come back and I'm going to take another selfie. So she comes back. You can see that she has added fake eyelashes. She's added glasses. She's got a little bit of work done to her lips. So what she's trying to do is bypass all of the biometrics, the technology, by having things done to her face. Well, it doesn't work. And so she fails again. And this time, though, the process in this particular dealership didn't work because they rolled the vehicle. So despite her multiple failing in this particular case, they rolled the vehicle. And I spoke earlier about notifications to GMs or DPs, dealer principals. We alerted that dealer principal and they stopped the vehicle in transit, actually. And so for this one, there was no financial loss, but you can think about the manual verification and the administration that was onto this dealership, the operational costs of this. She got away. I like to say that she'll be back. So here you can see all of the liveness that she took of herself. And on the bottom, all of the IDs that she used in 2 different provinces with a span of 7 months. We'll see her again. Okay, this fella here, I like to call masterclass in synthetic identity and behavioral mimicry. So this is really important for Quebec driver's license, a trend that we're seeing quite frequently here. This person was presents a Quebec driver's license. He has a 306, so a Saskatchewan phone number, and he's applying for a Toyota Tacoma in a luxury vehicle dealership. Again, flag, geography, okay? And so some of the cues that he had is that he negotiated the price a little bit, so showing, typical customer friction. He actually gave a deposit of $1,500, and he was totally willing to wait for that pre-approval before pickup. Now, fortunately, the dealer principal in this one had spidey senses up, and so went basically the long distance with this person and asked for proof of income. This person was able to produce employment statements. And the story that he gave was he has a 306 phone number because he works for a construction company. He lives in Quebec, but they often ship him to Saskatchewan every other month or every couple of months. And he'll be coming into Vancouver. And so he needs a vehicle for when he goes to Vancouver, which is why he wants the pre-qualification before he books his flight to come and pick up the car. This one here, we found out that it just so happens, and you can read about this, happy to send it to you or you can look it up, that there were arrests made in Q4 of last year where there were some insider threats happening or collusion happening at the SAC office in Quebec, where driver's licenses were being issued to bad actors, basically. So real victims' information coupled with a bad actor picture, but because it was being issued or is being issued from the registry, so the source of truth, it will pass every single identity verification technology out there because it originates as the source of truth. And so with this, and you can read about it here, but they revealed that 2,000 fake Quebec driver's licenses were issued. This was in combination with a small business who was running driver's testing as well. So that whole operation has been shut down. However, it's good to be aware that this is happening. And how do you overcome this? It is by enabling other technology. I mentioned before verification, ID verification and income verification to the source. Looking at biometrics. There's other types of signals that can be picked up on that we offer that cracks this. So this is something for you to be aware of. Again, I can't stress enough the triangulated identity is number one behavior. Having truths of source or source of truth for proof of employment or proof of income. And again, what we like to say is a zero trust cross-provincial protocol. So if somebody, again, cross-provincial, whatever the scenario may be, having that protocol up, that maybe there's different processes to be followed for that. And David, I think that's it. We have enough time to open for questions, and we are 2 minutes ahead. So great job, David.
You too. Thank you.
So does anybody have any questions or comments? We have 15 minutes and just throw it out there.
Just looking for the chat. Sorry. Any questions, folks? Fraud, implementation, things that we're seeing.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ryan, for starting this, and Jason.
Yes, we're able to share the presentation, and I think Eliza with the MMDA will make sure that goes out to everybody who's registered for this. Do dealers implement before test drive? Yes, that's probably best practice. We're seeing that. We know in Ontario that we've had a couple of dealerships that have received visits from the OPP and their fraud and investigations units, just talking broadly about fraud. And then once they find out that they're using a solution like ours, they recommend that it's used at test drive. They've got some pretty nasty stories to tell about bad things that have happened at test drives, but it sort of just gets to generally of not inviting the criminals in, because what the difference between fraud, say 10 years ago and today, is the scalability of it. And if you have a lone fraudster, they're going to look at a technology solution like this and probably not want to use it. And we've been surprised at this then, is that as we've seen the scale of fraud and the organization of it, then they're hiring straw people and they're not going to stop. They're going to go as far as they can because they don't get paid by walking away. They go all the way through, and if they get caught, they've been told, which is probably generally true, that the risk reward is very skewed in their favor. The penalties are low. They're not likely to get caught. And at a minimum, they're going to go back and tell the organization everything they know about that process.
I think, David, just before we move on, I would just add that the process for the test drives, literally, if you think about it, is so fast that you could send the alert or send the transaction to the buyer, to the applicant, consumer. And while you're going to pick up the keys for that test drive, it can be done. So it's that fast. It's not as if you need to sit down at a desk and there needs to be awkwardness. It's something that you can do literally while you're walking to get the keys, get the results, and off you go for the test drive.
Yeah, there's also a crossover on auto theft here too, where there is a fraud use case where they'll take a test drive, they'll copy the signal on the fob of the key, and they'll come back and steal it at night or at a closed time. So to stop that is that your ID, and that person's obviously not going to be presenting their real ID if they're doing that, so you can catch them by doing it at test drive. Nadine's question, if we are interested in software, what are the next steps? Book a demo. You should see it in action, head to head against anything else out there. We're pretty successful, like once we show people how it works. So you can go onto our website, click on book a demo and do that, and maybe just add in the comment section that you saw the webinar. What are the benefits and differences between yours and other vendors? Yeah, so as I mentioned before, there's lots of choice. I won't kind of spend 10 minutes on this, although I'd love to. I'd say the main thing, so underlying technology generally across these solutions is roughly comparable. From our perspective, it gets into the journey and the use of this and how easy it is to use. And I think the main thing for us is the flexibility to do this wherever you want on the journey, which gets to where you're exposed to identity fraud. And if you're only using a solution that starts in a portal, that credit portal, that means you've got credit people, i.e. finance people using it. But what about the other places within the dealership where identity fraud can hit you at a test drive, at delivery, in the parts department, et cetera? So our solution has that flexibility. Obviously, I mentioned before, we're integrated into Route One. We're integrated with one large big blue bank directly as well. And our system basically works at any credit portal. So there's not too many that can say that as well. Darren's question, am I correct that it is not necessarily a pass-fail result? Your results are a percentage. No, it is a pass-fail. If it's a fail, then we show the reasons for that. I mentioned 3% are fraud. There's probably another 3%. So let's say 6% overall that will fail. But the other 50% of that 6% is actually user error. And it has to do with lighting. It might be glare. It might be that the person didn't read instructions and took 2 pictures at the front of their ID or the back and things like that. How does this system integrate with existing DMSs or CRMs? We're open to those discussions. We've certainly had discussions with a couple of the DMSs. And yeah, we'd be happy to hear more about that. We're doing our own sort of portal integrations as well as lender integrations. So we make sure that this information gets to where it needs to get to as efficiently and quickly as possible. Are there plans to integrate? Oh, wait a sec. Sorry. When a legitimate ID fails, how fast is the reason it failed? Well, so if it fails, then you're either stopping that transaction there, or you're looking for another identity document because you're probably not going to be able to proceed then with the fail. I guess that would be a false positive around that. I can count the fingers in less than one hand the number of times we've seen that in about 4 years and 100,000 transactions. Are there any plans to integrate directly with Dealertrack? We would love that. They apparently they don't because they want to. They've got their own solution and have basically blocked anybody from integrating directly. So we've had to work with the banks in particular on pathways to get that information to them. Opinion on the decree of enforcement by FINTRAC on stores not having an AML compliance policy. Yeah, so the FINTRAC rules, for those of you that are, I mean, I'm sure you've all heard about this, but the rules are actually in effect right now, but the enforcement of those rules will start in a couple months, as it infers there on April 2026. FINTRAC has made Canadian leasing and finance companies, in quotation, reporting entities under FINTRAC and subject now to those laws under FINTRAC, similar to what the banks themselves have been under for forever, essentially, and insurance companies as well. And if you're a leasing company, you are now a reporting entity. If you're a dealership, you are not. You might be acting on behalf of or as an agent of, probably like what you're doing already for banks, but you might be included now in the leasing company's compliance policy and program. Because they're going to be responsible to ensure end to end that entire process is FINTRAC compliant. Onboarding support or training. Oh yeah, this is a differentiator as well for us. We're really good at that. I mentioned earlier that we will talk about those 4 different questions with the management team to make sure that those are communicated. Number of people, process, technology. It's not just one, it's all of these working together in partnership that really stops fraud. And then, once we've got onboarding the users that are going to be doing this, then we'll train them an hour session, and we'll have basically some amazing support afterward where it's pretty quick on any questions that you have on a result that you want us to look at. If you're seeing anything, Anne-Marie's, her husband is ex-OPP anti-racket, so she's very plugged into law enforcement across the country. And unfortunately, as the case may be, we've had to use that a few times. We have a few active investigations. So there's a lot of, again, it's not just here's the technology. It's a lot of everything else that we do. Partnership, and how does that translate to dealers? So basically that integration we have with them basically means that the data goes directly to them. So there's no need for anything, any portal integration. If you're using Pays to get that data to them, they'll tell you that that's it. You don't need to export PDF, attach to funding, etc. Yeah, Eliza, that would be kind of our 3%, I guess, in general that we've seen since inception. So about 3% of what we see is fraud. And, those are big numbers when you multiply them by 100,000. And I mean, the vehicle values now that we're stopping are quite a bit bigger than 50,000, I would say.
David, I would just add to just for marketplace, a usual stat is 3 to 5% when you implement technology. So we are well on the low end of that.
If someone is rejected at a dealership, does that information get shared to other dealerships or surrounding ones? No, not automatically. We do have the ability for people if they want to opt into that, but the default setting is that you don't do that. So we do have the ability to again, if you opt in and you want to share that, so it's sort of a give and get. If you don't want to do that, then we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, but I will add to what we do though is we do send out fraud alerts. So when we see in cases that there are an area or a postal code or a province, or there's a certain threat vector that keeps happening, we will actually send out fraud alerts to our customers, making them aware of the fraud threat in that area.
Yeah, we won't spam you with fraud from New Brunswick or BC, let's say, but if it's in your province, we'll send it. The other thing we do that Anne-Marie referenced earlier with one of the fraud use cases is that she creates something called suspicious transaction notices that will go to a dealer principal. And there's a bunch of different things that will trigger that, but the main one is that we're seeing the same user at the dealer, the same customer, go through multiple repeated failure attempts with different documents. And the normal legitimate behavior of that would be to not keep doing that. And if we see it, we just create a notice and we send it to the dealer principal to make them aware of that. And that's essentially what stopped that $140,000 Cadillac Escalade in Edmonton from, it was actually on the way to a hotel, and that's another problem, delivering. So that got turned around. Okay, those are great questions. I think we got a few minutes if there's any more. Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. Kind of we have to redact some of the PII and the pictures, but we're kind of an open book on this. Again, it's not just technology here, it's about fraud prevention, and we see ourselves really as the partner for you in stopping this type of fraud. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate the attendance.
Yes.
And as I mentioned before, I think Eliza will send out the presentation. I think there's a recording as well. If you're interested in that, then please reach out to, depending on which association you're members of, that they will have that.
Can I just
Thanks
ask?
again.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, of course.
Can I just ask a quick question? So, are you seeing more of this fraud happening with higher credit score stuff than a low credit score?
Different vectors there. So you've got the bust out thing where the auto approval is what they're targeting, and auto approval keys around prime, prime plus, super prime. So those vehicles are typically, up to 100, and we stopped 5 of them in November from one dealership. The combined value is about 600,000. Mercedes, Range Rover SUVs, and then you've got the other end as well. Actually, like, I'm actually shocked to be able to tell you that we've seen $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 as well, and typically those people are not, the people purchasing those are not prime. They're near prime or subprime customers. So fraud seems to be relatively democratized across the credit classes, but it's a different type of attack vector and how that manifests.
I think that's a great question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that prime approval, it's always like, yes, and then you kind of let your guard down because he's a prime guy. You think right away, oh, okay, that's all good then. And so that's startling to hear that they're actually into that now, where they're developing prime and super prime applications.
Yeah, we had one in another one that isn't a case study, which ended in 3 pictures we got from the GM of somebody in handcuffs in southwestern Ontario, was where they had basically, long story short, was they had somebody presenting as a prime customer. Remember, prime is going to drive a high ability to pay, right? So a big monthly payment, which then associates with a high value vehicle. This was a GMC 1500 Sierra, brand new, $110,000 pickup truck. And it's easy to kind of retrospectively look at like all the things that went wrong with this, but basically presented and with a document, identity, and I think a super prime customer. And turns out that she was part of an organized gang that actually had people working at the MTO, the Ministry of Transport of Ontario, issuing documents that were basically government issued documents based on somebody else's credentials. And so, yeah, she got arrested, but you can imagine that gang probably has a bunch of those people. So and if we haven't said before, let's just say it, and then maybe it's some people have left already. It's a lot of things here working together that are going to solve this problem, right? It's not, let's put in a piece of technology, one piece of technology, and it's all going to be good. It's people, right? It's process. And then it's, reviewing process. How are things working? Looking at every month. Well, we've done 5 IDV transactions, but we sold 50 vehicles. That's a problem. What happened there? We're lucky we didn't get hit. Who's using it? Who's not using it? Why aren't you using it? We've got dealerships that are now building this in not only into process documents, but also, almost like recovery type schemes where if they don't use it, then they're making people personally liable for it because the problem has just got to be that big.
So what makes Quebec so corrupt? Is it the processes or the people?
Are we still being recorded?
Wait a sec. I'm not saying that. I think
no, but it is. It's in everything I've ever been involved with. It's always Quebec that they have a different philosophy out there that it's okay to steal and be corrupt if you don't get caught. And when they get caught, they'll just laugh at you like, "Oh, you caught me, shame on me." And I
Randy,
don't understand the culture in that place.
Well, look, Randy, I will tell you that the fraud capital of Canada is not in Quebec. It's in my province, in Anne-Marie's province, and it's probably about a half an hour drive northwest of here. And it's like there's a few hot spots, I would say, but and lots of creativity is what I'd say. If nothing else, yeah, there's creativity in the vectors or the way that they attempt. There's creativity in the stories. There's creativity in the responses, and that just means that we need to be creative as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, likewise. Okay, everybody, take care. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.